You've heard tales of battlefields across Europe, the mud-soaked trenches of the Western Front, the frozen wastes of the Eastern. But there's another story from the Great War, one buried beneath official reports and diplomatic cables. A calculated annihilation so precise it would later inspire the very concept of genocide itself. The Armenian intellectuals, community leaders, and resistance figures who faced systematic elimination at the hands of the Ottoman Empire. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's extensive archives, records released by the Armenian National Institute in 2023, testimonies preserved in the Armenian Patriarchate of Constantinople archives, and declassified diplomatic correspondence from the British Foreign Office. The setting: the Ottoman Empire, 1915. Three men control the fate of millions: Enver Pasha, Minister of War; Jamal Pasha, Minister of the Navy; and the most powerful, Talat Pasha, Minister of the Interior. These triumvirate leaders of the Committee of Union and Progress, known as the Young Turks, have already embraced a radical ideology of Turkish nationalism that leaves no room for Armenia's 2 million Ottoman citizens. In January, Ottoman forces suffer a devastating defeat at Sarıkamış against Russian forces. Over 90,000 men of the Third Army are lost, more than half the entire force. Though Armenian soldiers fought loyally in Ottoman ranks, freezing and dying alongside their Turkish comrades in the Caucasus Mountains, the Young Turk leadership publicly blames this military disaster on Armenian treachery. It's a calculated lie, but one that provides the perfect pretext. The machinery of elimination begins turning. The groundwork has been laid for months. The special organization, Teşkilat-ı Mahsusa, a paramilitary group operating under direct orders from the Young Turk leadership, has been recruiting Kurdish tribes, released prisoners, and Circassian refugees. Their mission: the systematic elimination of Ottoman Armenians. By spring of 1915, this shadow army numbers over 30,000 operatives scattered across the empire. The night that changed everything: April the 24th, 1915, Constantinople. Midnight strikes across the ancient city that bridges two continents. The date that will forever mark the beginning of a systematic extermination, what Armenians now commemorate as Red Sunday. Minister of Interior Talat Pasha gives the order from his office in the Sublime Porte. Police Chief Bedri Bey leads the operation with military precision. The arrest lists have been prepared for weeks, every name carefully selected, every address confirmed. 235 Armenian intellectuals arrested in the first wave: writers, doctors, lawyers, journalists, political leaders, teachers, clergymen, anyone capable of organizing resistance or preserving cultural memory. The arrests begin simultaneously across the capital. No warrants issued, no charges read, just the knock on the door in the darkness, the rough hands, the journey to Sirkeji railway station where cattle cars wait. By morning, the number swells to over 500. By week's end, nearly 600 of Armenia's brightest minds have vanished into the empire's interior. These weren't random detentions driven by wartime panic. Each name had been carefully vetted by the Interior Ministry, each arrest precisely calculated to achieve maximum psychological impact. The deliberate decapitation of a people, removing not just political leaders, but the teachers who educated their children, the writers who preserved their stories, the doctors who healed their sick, the priests who maintained their faith. The pattern emerges immediately. Target the intellectuals first. Silence the voices that could organize resistance or document atrocities. Eliminate those who carried the collective memory of the Armenian people. It's a blueprint that future genocidaires would study and replicate with chilling efficiency. Number 1, Krikor Zorab, the parliamentarian silenced. 1915, Constantinople, Krikor Zorab. 51 years old, Armenian member of the Ottoman Parliament for Constantinople, distinguished lawyer, celebrated writer, and close personal friend of Talat Pasha himself. Known as the Prince of the Armenian short novel, Zorab embodied the promise of Ottoman constitutionalism, a Christian minority member rising to the highest levels of government through merit and eloquence. For years, Zorab had defended Ottoman pluralism in parliament and in print. He'd written extensively about the need for equal rights regardless of religion or ethnicity. His legal practice included both Armenian and Turkish clients. His friendship with Talat stretched back to their early political careers, when both men championed constitutional reforms against Sultan Abdul Hamid's autocracy. But in the paranoid atmosphere of 1915, past friendships become liabilities. Despite his parliamentary immunity, despite his decades of loyal service to the Ottoman state, despite his personal relationship with Talat Pasha, Zorab becomes a target. The Young Turks cannot allow even one prominent Armenian to remain as a symbol of minority participation in Ottoman government. On May 21st, 1915, Zohrab and fellow Armenian deputy Vartkis Sarangoulian are arrested at the parliament building itself, their immunity swept aside like a worthless piece of paper. Fellow parliamentarians watch in stunned silence as two of their colleagues are led away in shackles. The message is unmistakable. If sitting members of parliament aren't safe, no Armenian is safe. The two men are told they'll face a court-martial in Diyarbakir for alleged treasonous activities. No evidence is presented, no specific charges are filed. They're transported first to Aleppo, where sympathetic Ottoman officials tried desperately to intervene. Governor Celal Bey, one of the few high-ranking Ottomans who would later be remembered for protecting Armenians, even arranges medical care when Zohrab falls ill during the journey. But Talat's orders from Constantinople are relentless and crystal clear. The men must continue east to their fate. No exceptions. No mercy. Not even for old friends. Between July 15th and July 20th, 1915 Fassus. At a desolate place called Karakopru, near the ancient city of Urfa, the two parliamentarians meet their executioner, Circus Ahmet, a Circassian operative of the special organization known for his brutality. Years later, in a moment of boastful confession to a journalist, Ahmet would describe the killing in graphic detail. I grabbed Zohrab first, threw him to the ground, pinned him under my feet, and with a large rock crushed his skull. Crushed and crushed until I killed him completely. Vartkis Sarangoulian is dispatched with 3 shots from a Mauser rifle. Their bodies are thrown into a shallow grave beside the Euphrates River. No markers, no ceremonies, no official records of their deaths. The murder of sitting parliamentarians, men who had devoted their entire careers to Ottoman constitutional reforms, who had believed in the possibility of a pluralistic empire, proves that no Armenian is safe, regardless of rank, connections, or service to the state. The rule of law has been completely abandoned. The friend who once laughed with Talat at political dinners has become just another corpse in the Syrian desert. Assassinated, silenced, erased from history. Number 2, Daniel Varuzhin, the poet destroyed. April 1915. Daniel Varuzhin, 31 years old, stands at the pinnacle of Armenian literary achievement. Principal of St. Gregory the Illuminator School in Constantinople's Armenian Quarter, founder of the Mihian literary movement seeking Armenian cultural renaissance, author of collections like The Heart of the Race and The Song of the Bread, an epic celebration of Armenian rural life that remained tragically unfinished. Varuzhin represents everything the Young Turks fear most in Armenian intellectual life, a voice that celebrates Armenian culture while remaining loyal to the Ottoman state. His poetry speaks of Armenian farmers, shepherds, and village life with profound beauty and national pride. In their paranoid worldview, such cultural expression equals separatism, and separatism equals treason. On April 24th, Varuzhin is among those seized in the initial midnight sweep. Torn from his pregnant wife Arshaguhi and their young son, he's herded onto the cattle cars bound for exile. His unfinished manuscript of The Song of the Bread, 200 pages celebrating the honest labor of Armenian peasants, is confiscated by police and disappears forever into government archives. Transported first to the detention center at Chankiri with 46 other intellectuals, Varuzhin maintains his dignity even in captivity. Fellow prisoners later recall his attempts to keep up morale, reciting poetry from memory, organizing discussions about literature and philosophy. Even facing death, the teacher continues teaching. According to the eyewitness testimony of Grigoris Balakian, a bishop who survived the deportations by miraculous chance, Varuzhin and 4 other prisoners are being transferred from Chankiri to Ankara in August, when their horse-drawn carriage is intercepted at a location called Tiyuna by Kurdish militia working under instructions from the local Committee of Union and Progress Committee in Chankiri. What follows defies human comprehension. Beside a small stream, the militiamen strip Varuzhin completely naked and tie him to a tree. For hours, they torture him with knives, cutting his flesh while he's still alive and conscious. His screams echo across the valley until, on August 26, 1915, death finally claims Armenia's greatest poetic voice. The Kurdish militiamen mutilate his corpse further before throwing it into the stream. No grave, no marker. The hands that wrote of beauty and hope become food for the fish. In his poems, Varuzhin had written prophetically of hope for his people. He sows, not knowing who will reap the harvest. The Ottoman authorities ensure no one will harvest the fruits of his brilliant intellect again. The voice that could have become Armenia's national poet is silenced at age 31. Tortured, executed, silenced forever. Number 3, Father Gamidas, Vardabed, the voice of a culture. April 1915. Father Gamidas Vardabed, born Soghomon Soghomonian, 45 years old, stands as the most renowned Armenian composer and musicologist of his era. The man who has spent decades collecting, transcribing, and preserving over 3,000 pieces of Armenian folk music, the very soul of his people's cultural heritage, stretching back 15 centuries. A celibate priest educated at the prestigious Mkhitarist Seminary in Venice, Father Gamidas has dedicated his life to saving Armenia's musical traditions from extinction. He's traveled from village to village across historical Armenia, sitting with elderly peasants and recording their songs before they die with their memories. His transcriptions represent the largest collection of Armenian folk music ever assembled, irreplaceable cultural treasures. Despite having absolutely no political affiliations or activities, despite his religious vocation and scholarly pursuits, Father Gamidas finds his name on the arrest lists. His only crime, preserving Armenian cultural identity through music. In the twisted logic of the Young Turks, maintaining cultural distinctiveness equals disloyalty to the state. His international fame briefly saves him. Former United States Ambassador Henry Morgenthau and prominent Turkish poet Emin Yurdakul intervened personally with Talat Pasha, arguing that arresting such a renowned musician would damage the Ottoman Empire's reputation in European cultural circles. After 8 days in detention, Father Gamidas is released, one of the very few to walk free from the initial arrests. But what Father Gamidas witnesses during his brief detention at the Sirkeji station in Chankiri shatters his mind completely. The composer who preserved the musical soul of his people returns to Constantinople a broken man, suffering from what modern psychiatrists would diagnose as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The horrors he witnessed, fellow intellectuals beaten, tortured, murdered before his eyes, proved too much for his sensitive artist's soul to bear. The man who once conducted concerts across Europe and who had been working on a comprehensive scholarly study of Armenian musical history becomes largely silent. He spends the remaining 20 years of his life in psychiatric institutions in Paris, able to recall his childhood with perfect clarity but unable to function in the present, though he survives physically until 1935. His voice as a composer and scholar is effectively silenced from 1915 onward. The Ottoman authorities understand intuitively that eliminating a culture requires destroying more than just bodies. It requires erasing their collective memory, their songs, their stories, their artistic expressions. In silencing Father Gamidas, they silence the man who carried 15 centuries of Armenian musical tradition in his memory. When he breaks, that irreplaceable knowledge dies with him, traumatized, institutionalized, culturally murdered. Number 4, Ruben Sivak. The doctor's fatal diagnosis. April 24th, 1915. Dr. Ruben Sivak, born Ruben Chilingirian, 30 years old, represents the new generation of Armenian professionals, equally at home in Ottoman Turkish and classical Armenian. Trained in European universities, committed to modernizing his community while remaining loyal Ottoman citizens. A practicing physician who has dedicated his career to treating both Armenian and Turkish patients without discrimination, Sivak also writes poetry that bridges Armenian and Turkish literary traditions. His medical degree from Geneva and his fluency in multiple languages mark him as exactly the kind of educated, cosmopolitan Armenian the Young Turks most fear. Proof that Armenians can succeed and integrate while maintaining their distinct identity. Unlike some of his colleagues with international connections or foreign passports, Sivak has no powerful foreign allies to intervene on his behalf. His loyalty to the Ottoman state, his service to Turkish patients, his moderate political views, none of it matters in the paranoid atmosphere of 1915. He's Armenian, he's educated, he's articulate. That makes him dangerous. Sivak is first detained at the Sirkeji station with the other intellectuals, then transported to the internment center at Chankiri. Fellow prisoners later recall his attempts to maintain medical care for sick detainees using whatever crude supplies he can obtain, even in captivity. The doctor continues healing. In August, as the systematic murder of the Chankiri intellectuals begins, Sivak is deported further east toward Ankara. Near the town of Ayash, he's separated from other prisoners along with fellow physician Dr. Nazaret Dagavarian. The two healers, men who have dedicated their lives to preserving life regardless of their patients, ethnicity, or religion, are marched to a secluded valley outside the town. There, on August 26th, 1915, the same day Daniel Varugin meets his brutal fate near Chankiri, Ottoman gendarmes execute both doctors by gunshot. Their bodies are left unburied in the valley, their medical knowledge and healing skills extinguished in an instant. The hands that healed become food for vultures. In one of his final poems, written in his cell at Chankiri, Sivak had composed lines that now read like terrible prophecy. I have a wound in my heart, a voiceless wound that bleeds silently in the darkness of my soul. The Ottoman authorities ensure this healing voice will never speak again, silencing both the physician who saved lives and the poet who gave voice to Armenian hopes. Deported, executed, forgotten in an unmarked grave. Number 5. Siamanto, the revolutionary voice. 1915. Adam Yarjanian, 42 years old, writing under the pen name Siamanto, stands as one of Armenia's most powerful and revolutionary poetic voices. His work, fiery and uncompromising, calls explicitly for Armenian liberation from Ottoman rule. Unlike the moderate intellectuals who believed in reform and constitutional rights, Siamanto openly advocates for Armenian independence. After witnessing the horrific Adana massacres of 1909, where 30,000 Armenians were slaughtered in organized pogroms, Siamanto fled to America in disgust and disillusionment. From Boston, he edited the influential Armenian newspaper Haranik, writing editorials that condemned Ottoman oppression and called for armed resistance against Turkish rule. His poetry from this period burns with righteous anger. In verses like "The Bloody News for My Friend," he documents Ottoman atrocities in graphic detail, refusing to let the world forget Armenian suffering. His poem, "The Dance," prophetically declares, "The dance of the red embers will come and consume everything that oppresses us," but believing naively in the promises of constitutional reforms after the Young Turk Revolution of 1908. Siamanto makes his fatal mistake. He returns to Constantinople in 1914, convinced that the new regime will respect minority rights and intellectual freedom. His optimism proves tragically misplaced. Despite his explicitly anti-government writings, despite his calls for Armenian independence, despite his years of exile in America, Siamanto somehow believes his literary reputation will protect him. On April 24th, his name appears prominently on the arrest lists. The authorities have been tracking his activities for months. No foreign passports or international connections can save him now. Deported first to Chankiri with the other intellectuals, Siamanto initially maintains his defiant spirit. Fellow prisoners recall his recitations of revolutionary poetry, his attempts to keep up morale, his discussions of American democracy and individual rights. Even in captivity, the revolutionary continues preaching resistance. In August 1915, as the systematic murder of the intellectuals begins, Siamanto is moved east with a group toward Ankara. Outside the capital, he's separated from the main group of prisoners. No eyewitness accounts document his final moments. The authorities ensure no survivors remain to testify about his execution. Ottoman records later confirm his death along with 14 other Armenian intellectuals in a mass execution outside Ankara. The exact date remains unclear, sometime between August 24th and August 28th. His body is never recovered. His grave remains unmarked. The revolutionary voice that once thundered against Ottoman oppression is permanently silenced, but his words survive in the pages of Haranik smuggled to America. They can kill the singer, but they cannot kill the song. The Ottoman authorities silence the man, but cannot silence the memory of resistance. Arrested, executed, vanished without a trace. Number 6. Yervant Odian, the satirist who survived. 1915. Yervant Odian, 41 years old. Renowned satirical writer and theater critic for the Armenian newspaper Azadamard, possesses the sharpest pen in Ottoman Armenian journalism. His satirical sketches of Ottoman bureaucracy and social absurdities have made him famous and dangerous. Satire, the authorities understand, can be more subversive than direct political opposition. Odian's crime is laughter, his ability to make Ottoman readers laugh at their government, their society, their pretensions. His theatrical reviews and social commentary reach beyond the Armenian community to educated Turkish readers who appreciate his wit. This cross-cultural influence makes him particularly threatening to young Turk ideology. Arrested on April 24th with the others, Odian faces the same fate as his colleagues: deportation to Chankiri and eventual execution. But Odian possesses something most of his fellow prisoners lack: an intimate knowledge of Ottoman bureaucracy gained through years of satirizing it. He understands how the system works and, more importantly, how it can be manipulated. During his months in detention, Odian carefully observes his captors, identifies the corrupt officials who can be bribed, and slowly builds a network of contacts who can be bought or convinced to look the other way. His years of writing about Ottoman corruption have taught him exactly where the system's weak points lie. Through a combination of bribery, false documents, and pure luck, Odian manages to escape from a deportation convoy near Chankiri in September 1915. For months, he hides in safe houses across Anatolia, constantly moving, constantly in danger of recapture and immediate execution. Eventually, using forged papers identifying him as a Greek merchant, Odion makes his way to the Bulgarian border and escapes the Ottoman Empire entirely. He spends the war years in exile, writing his experiences in a memoir that becomes one of the most important eyewitness accounts of the intellectual deportations. Odion's survival allows him to document the fate of his fellow prisoners. His memoir, Weiss, The Cursed Years, published after the war, provides crucial testimony about the systematic murder of Armenian intellectuals. Without his eyewitness account, many details about the deaths of Varugin, Sevak, and others would have been lost to history. The satirist's pen, which once mocked Ottoman incompetence, becomes an instrument of historical preservation. His survival proves that sometimes laughter, and the quick wit that produces it, can overcome even the most brutal persecution. Arrested, deported, but ultimately survive to bear witness. Number 7, Rupin Sevag, The Young Voice Cut. Short, 1915. Rupin Sevag, born Rupin Chilingirian, only 24 years old but already recognized as one of the most promising voices in modern Armenian poetry. Unlike the older generation of writers who wrote primarily in classical Armenian, Sevag writes in the vernacular language of ordinary people, making his poetry accessible to working-class Armenians across the empire. His youth represents hope for the future, a new generation of Armenian intellectuals who might bridge traditional culture and modern ideas. This potential makes him particularly dangerous to the Young Turk project of cultural elimination. The authorities understand that killing the young means preventing the emergence of future leaders. Sevag's poetry celebrates Armenian village life, the dignity of common labor, and the beauty of Armenian landscapes. His verses speak of shepherds in mountain pastures, farmers in wheat fields, women weaving carpets in village workshops. This celebration of Armenian rural culture directly contradicts Young Turk ideology, which demands that all Ottoman subjects identify primarily as Turks. Arrested in the initial sweep, Sevag is transported to Chankiri with the other intellectuals. His youth initially seems like it might save him. Surely the authorities won't murder someone barely out of university. But the systematic nature of the extermination makes no exceptions for age. In August 1915, Sevag is selected for deportation further east. According to survivor testimony from Grigoris Balakian, Sevag maintains his spirits even as death approaches, composing final poems in his head since he has no paper to write them down. Fellow prisoners recall his recitations around the prison campfire, his voice carrying across the courtyard as he speaks verses about Armenian mountains he will never see again. Near the town of Chankiri, on August 27, 1915, Sevag is taken with a group of 12 other intellectuals to a ravine outside the town. Kurdish militiamen working for the local committee of Union and Progress Committee execute all 13 men with rifle fire. Sevag, the youngest victim, dies with a half-finished poem on his lips. His body is thrown into a mass grave with his colleagues. No marker identifies the resting place of Armenia's most promising young poet. The voice that might have spoken for a generation is silenced at 24 years old. The murder of Sevag represents the systematic destruction not just of current Armenian intellectual leadership, but of future leadership. The Young Turks understand that genocide requires killing not just the present, but the future itself. Arrested, murdered, silenced before his voice could fully mature. The bureaucracy of extermination. The killing of Armenian intellectuals represents just the opening act of a much larger drama. Behind the midnight arrests and desert murders lies a vast bureaucratic apparatus designed to coordinate the systematic elimination of an entire people. The Young Turk leadership has learned from previous massacres that spontaneous violence, while effective, remains incomplete. This time, they plan total extermination through administrative efficiency. Talat Pasha, as Minister of Interior, controls the entire operation from his office in Constantinople. Every deportation order, every transport schedule, every selection for execution must receive his approval. The man who once called Krikor Zorab his friend has become the chief architect of Armenian annihilation. The special organization serves as the primary killing apparatus, but the regular Ottoman bureaucracy provides essential support. Provincial governors receive coded telegrams ordering deportations. Railroad officials coordinate transport schedules. Local police chiefs prepare arrest lists. Even postmasters receive instructions to intercept Armenian correspondence. The system operates with terrifying efficiency because it operates through normal government channels. Ottoman citizens have been trained for centuries to obey government orders without question. When the deportation orders arrive, signed with official seals and bearing Talaat's signature, local officials comply automatically. But the bureaucracy of extermination produces its own evidence. Years later, historians would uncover thousands of documents proving the systematic nature of the killings. In 2017, Historian Taner Akçam discovered a smoking gun, an original telegram from Talat Pasha himself, archived in Jerusalem, explicitly ordering the liquidation of Armenians. The telegram reads in part, "The Committee of Union and Progress has decided to destroy completely all the indicated persons living in Turkey. Their existence must be terminated, however tragic the measures taken may be, and no regard must be paid to either age or sex, or to any scruples of conscience. Such documentary evidence demolishes any claims that the killings represented spontaneous wartime violence or defensive measures against rebellion. This was planned, systematic genocide carried out through official government channels with meticulous record-keeping. The bureaucrats who processed deportation orders, who scheduled transport trains, who filed execution reports, created an archive of their own crimes. The very efficiency they prided themselves on became the evidence that would eventually convict them in the court of history. The pattern emerges. Analyzing the fates of Armenian resistance leaders reveals a clear pattern in Young Turk methodology. First, eliminate the intellectuals who could organize resistance or document atrocities. Second, destroy cultural institutions that preserve national identity. Third, scatter the remaining population through deportations that separate families and communities. Fourth, use the chaos of war to cover systematic murder. The timing proves crucial. By launching the extermination during World War I, the Young Turks calculate correctly that international attention will focus on European battlefields rather than Ottoman internal affairs. The great powers have neither the capacity nor the inclination to intervene on behalf of Armenian civilians. The targeting reveals sophisticated understanding of how societies function. By killing parliamentarians like Zorab, they eliminate legal opposition. By murdering poets like Varuzhan and Sevig, they silence cultural expression. By traumatizing musicians like Father Gomidas, they destroy collective memory. By executing doctors like Sevag, they remove community leaders. By hunting down revolutionaries like Siamanto, they crush armed resistance. Each category of victim serves a specific purpose in the larger project of cultural elimination. The Young Turks understand that destroying a people requires more than killing bodies. It requires erasing their history, their culture, their very identity from the face of the earth. The systematic nature of the killings becomes evident when comparing dates. Varuzhan dies on August 26th. Sevek dies on August 26th. Rupen Sevag dies on August 27th. These aren't random murders. They represent coordinated executions carried out simultaneously across different locations according to a central plan. The efficiency appalls even by the standards of 20th century mass murder. In 5 months, from April to September 1915, the Ottoman authorities succeed in eliminating virtually the entire Armenian intellectual class. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, writers, priests, journalists, an entire educated elite disappears. The impact proves devastating and permanent. Armenian communities lose their natural leaders, their organic intellectuals, their cultural creators. The social fabric tears beyond repair. Communities that had existed for centuries simply cease to function as cohesive entities. Echoes across time. Standing today at the Armenian Genocide Memorial in Yerevan, visitors encounter 12 sloping slabs of stone arranged in a circle around an eternal flame, one slab for each historical Armenian province lost to Turkish occupation. But the true monument exists not in stone but in memory, in the testimonies preserved against impossible odds, in the cultural heritage that survived systematic attempts at destruction. The resistance leaders silenced in 1915 could not have imagined that their stories would eventually reach a global audience, that their deaths would be commemorated in parliaments and universities around the world, that their sacrifice would inspire international laws against genocide and crimes against humanity. The Young Turks succeeded tactically but failed strategically. They eliminated the immediate leadership of Armenian resistance, but they could not eliminate the idea of Armenian identity itself. Survivors carried that identity to diaspora communities in America, France, Argentina, and dozens of other countries where it took root and flourished. The writings of Varuzhan, Sevag, Oin, and Siamanto, smuggled out of the Ottoman Empire by desperate survivors, found new audiences among Armenian Americans who had escaped the genocide. Their poems, once banned by Ottoman censors, became rallying cries for justice and remembrance. The musical traditions preserved by Father Gomidas, though damaged by his trauma, survived in the memories of his students and in the manuscripts hidden by brave archivists. Today, Armenian folk songs he collected and transcribed are performed in concert halls from Paris to Los Angeles to Moscow. Even Krikor Zorab's parliamentary speeches, preserved in Ottoman legislative records, became evidence in post-war trials of Young Turk leaders. His words advocating for minority rights, Spoken in the parliament where he was later arrested, testified against his murderers. The bureaucracy of extermination, so efficient at killing, proved less efficient at erasing memory. Documents survived, witnesses escaped, stories spread. The very thoroughness of the Young Turk Project, their obsession with record-keeping and administrative precision, created the evidence that would eventually expose their crimes. The final toll: 500 intellectuals arrested in the initial sweep, 15 hours to decapitate an entire people's leadership. By September 1915, fewer than 50 of those arrested on Red Sunday remained alive. The rest had been murdered in desert ravines, beside remote streams, in prison courtyards, and in a dozen other killing sites across Anatolia. But the intellectual murders represented only the beginning. Over the next 3 years, 1.5 million Armenian civilians would follow their leaders into death. Entire communities would vanish. Ancient cities would lose their Armenian populations forever. Churches would become mosques. Schools would close. Libraries would burn. Graveyards would be plowed under. The systematic destruction succeeded beyond the Young Turks' wildest expectations. By 1918, historical Armenia, the land where Armenians had lived for over 2.5 millennia, had been largely emptied of its Armenian population. The survivors scattered to the winds, carrying only memories and a burning desire for justice. Today, the Republic of Armenia occupies barely 10% of historical Armenian territory. The great majority of Armenian lands remain under Turkish control, their original inhabitants long dead or dispersed. Ancient churches crumble from neglect. Historical sites are deliberately destroyed or allowed to decay. The physical evidence of 25 centuries of Armenian presence slowly disappears, yet the memory persists. In diaspora communities from Los Angeles to Paris to Buenos Aires, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of genocide survivors preserve the stories, the traditions, the languages that the Young Turks tried to eliminate. They publish the poems of murdered writers, perform the music of traumatized composers, and tell the stories of silenced leaders. The resistance leaders may have been destroyed, but their legacy echoes still. Their final epitaph stands carved in stone at the Tsitsernakaberd Memorial in Yerevan. They can destroy the vessels, but not the spirit that created them. In that spirit, their voices continue to speak across the decades, demanding justice, insisting on remembrance, refusing to be silenced even in death. The Young Turks succeeded in murdering the men, but they failed to murder their message. And in that failure lies both the tragedy and the triumph of the Armenian experience in the 20th century.